Now, which light would win this sort of experiment? Sam here from GrowBuds, and today we'll be reviewing and doing some part testing from 3 LED grow lights, some budget LED grow lights. We'll share with you the results so you guys can have an idea of where your money is worth spending and why. We have a lot to cover, so let's jump into it right now. All right, so the 3 models that we'll be reviewing today are the Spider Farmer SF4000. We also have the XS4000 from Viparspectra, along with the TS3000 from Mars Hydro. So let's begin with the Spider Farmer SF4000. So I'll include the advertised specs here on the screen so you guys can follow along. So the first thing you should take into consideration when looking at these specs, especially when it comes to the PPF, is that there are 3 main ways that you can calculate this. The most widely spread way of doing it, and I'm pretty sure this is the case for Spider Farmer and the 2 other lights that we're testing today, is calculated PPF. So calculated PPF is actually very simple to do, and that's why many companies will use that metric. And it also gives you some pretty interesting numbers because it sort of assumes that there's 100% efficiency in the light. So obviously the numbers that you guys are going to see when it's calculated PPF are actually higher than what you really get. The second way some reputable companies will test their light is that they'll do a total PPF measurement, and that is done with a sphere where we capture all the photons, the PAR photons that are emitted by the light, and that gives us the total PPF. So you'll see some lights out there that have these, but today we're really interested in is the usable PPF. And the way we're going to measure the usable PPF is actually quite simple. We're going to do some PAR testing of our light in a specific environment. And then once we take all of our measurements that we get, we do an average of those that we then multiply by the grow area that we're testing, and that gives us the usable PPF. So in our experiment, we're going to measure the usable PPF, which refers to the amount of photons that will actually reach your canopy, because even in the most perfect environment, there's going to be 10 to 15% loss. So it's interesting for us to see what is the amount of PAR photons that will actually reach our canopy. And this is a practical information for us growers, obviously. And when we get this information, we can also calculate other things, such as the usable efficiency or the cost efficiency of our light, which is also interesting to analyze. Now, it's very important to mention that when we're doing these tests, our PAR testing and everything, and calculating our usable PPF, there's a lot of factors that can change the results. One of them, for example, is going to be the reflectiveness of our walls, but there's other factors that will affect the results. So take into consideration that the numbers that we'll display are obviously going to be lower than the ones that are advertised from manufacturers. Like I said, that's because we're not talking theoretically here. We're really looking at the PPFD readings that we get at the canopy. The second thing you need to take into consideration is the fact that we have a certain protocol. If you do it differently, you might end up having different results. That's totally normal. But what we try to do here is keep the same protocol for the 3 different lights that we're going to test, so you guys kind of have an idea of how they compare to each other. So I'll just go quickly over our protocol so you guys can see how we get those numbers. What we do is very simple. We want it to be as accurate as possible and relate to people who are growing in 4x4 grow tents at home. So we set it up a 4x4 grow tent with a medium quality mylar. So the reflectiveness is not through the roof, but it is still pretty decent. And then at the bottom, we have a grid that we made with 64 squares, which allows us to take readings in each and every square. Now, what you're going to see most of the time is going to be, when you look at PAR charts, are going to be 3 different PAR charts of the light being hung at different distances from the canopy. So that's a good way to do it. But in order for us to have our usable PPF, what we're doing is we are looking for our maximum reading to be at around 1000 ppfd. So for you guys who don't know, when you're growing cannabis, if you're not supplementing with CO2, which is mostly the case with people growing in smaller environments, you don't really want to go above 1,000 ppfd. You'll just end up having some issues. However, it's important to know that you don't really want to go below 500 as well, because that's just not enough. The ideal range here would be between 500 and 1,000 ppfd. What we do is that we bring down the light to when we get a 1,000 ppfd reading, which is most likely going to be at the center of our grow space here. And once we have that, we just make sure that the light is properly centered and also balanced, so that we can start taking some measurements in each square, and we'll compile those into a bar chart. So here you guys can see the results that we have for the Spider Farmer SF4000. Now it's interesting to look at this map right away, just to notice how light spreads across the area. As you can see, there's a huge concentration of light where we get optimal readings in the center of our grow space, and then it quickly dissipates once we go on the edges. And you guys will probably also notice that the readings that are below, like at the bottom, tend to be a bit lower than the ones that are above. And the only reason is that when we did our test, we actually let one side of the tent open, and so where you guys can see the readings are lower is just because there's not as much reflective material condensing or reflecting photons to that area. So that just shows how important the reflective walls are going to be. But I mean, yeah, it's we did the same for the tree lights, so our test should still be valid here. So what we're interested in doing here is that we're going to take an average of all of our 64 readings, and then we'll multiply that value by the test area that we're in. So in this case, we're in a 4x4 grow tent, which is approximately 1.49 square meters. So we'll multiply our 558 by 1.49, and then it gives us 831. And that's the usable ppf for that grow light. Now, there are some tools out there that you guys can use, such as websites like Coco for Cannabis, where there are calculators that will actually give you some very interesting information with that usable ppf that we just calculated. For example, if I take the Spider Farmer here, I'll first input the power draw, which is 450 watts, and then I'll also insert the cost here, which is around $560 US. Now, you have the choice between using either calculated ppf, like I said, most manufacturers are using this. You can also use total ppf, which is the test with the sphere I was referring to, or you can use usable ppf that we just calculated. So in our case, we're going to use usable ppf, and then we are going to enter that 831 micromoles. And there we go. So that gives us other information that is really interesting. What we can see is the usable PPE, which is basically the efficiency. The here for the Spider Farmer is at 1.85. So it's considered an elite efficiency. So far, so good for this light. And then we also have cost efficiency, which is very interesting, where we have 67 cents per micromole in the case of our Spider Farmer SF4000 here. That's considered a good price. We can even sort of estimate the harvest potential that you can get out of a light like this. And so you get a low range of about 457 grams and a high range of about 624 grams. So that's about 22 ounces maximum probably that you can get. Again, this is going to vary a lot depending on whether you're using, depending on the strain that you guys are growing, depending on the nutrients that you're using, and a lot of other factors obviously, but it's just to give you an idea. So yeah, I mean 22 ounces per light, it's pretty decent, and it's pretty much like a really good price at 67 cents per micromole. Now for the Mars Hydro, you guys can see the par chart that we have here for the Mars Hydro. One thing that I want to mention really quickly is that the Mars Hydro was a bit skeptical with their design at the beginning. This sort of reflector that they had, and it kind of confirmed a little bit what I was thinking. So as you guys can see, there's a huge concentration of light just in the center. It's also worth mentioning that we had to hang the light a bit lower than the others to get that 1000 ppf that we were looking for. But you guys can see here, there's a huge concentration of light in the center, and because of those reflectors, it fades on the edges even quicker than the other competitors here. Yeah, in terms of like the spread of the light in this fixture, something that is, I would say, it's not as good as the other ones, let's say. But still, let's analyze here our average. So in this situation, we have an average of 529. So if we take that 529 and we multiply it by our area again, we get 788 micromoles. So that's our usable ppf for this light. I'll just go ahead and input the information here in our calculator. So the light draws 450 watts and it retails for about $450. It's a bit cheaper than the other ones. It's also a bit older, I think, but yeah. And then our usable ppf being at 788 here, we get an efficiency of 1.65 micromoles per watt, which is an elite efficiency again. Seems to be doing good so far. And here, which is what is quite interesting, is the cost efficiency. So we're talking about 57 cents per micromole. It's an excellent price according to this calculator, and it's definitely better than the Spider Farmer we just saw. When it comes to harvest potential, on the higher end, we're looking at maybe 591 grams, so about 21 ounces. It's a bit less than the Spider Farmer, but still pretty decent here. It's also worth mentioning that we took some temperature measurements on the lights. So we let them run for about 2 hours each one, and then we took a measurement on the panel or the heatsink, and then we took one on the driver. And the temperatures were actually pretty high with the Mars Hydro. If you compare them with the Spider Farmer, for example, on the Spider Farmer, we had a temperature of 65 degrees Celsius on our driver and 53 on the panel. If you look at the Mars Hydro TS3000, we had 60 degrees Celsius on our driver and 60 on our panel. So it runs a bit hotter than the Spider Farmer, might affect the lifetime of your diodes or the overall efficacy. But when you look at the build of the light itself, the panel is a bit very thin actually with Mars Hydro. So I mean, the technology here for heat dissipation is probably a bit inferior than what you can see in Spider Farmer. Now, the last light here that we were going to look at is the Viparspectra XS4000. And one thing you can notice again from that par chart here is that since the light has a rectangular shape, it sort of really covered well the central area of our grow space, even going further along the edges than the other lights. However, you see that it quickly fades out on the edges again. So it's just, you can already see that the light has a bit of a different shape. If you compare it, for example, with a square light like the Spider Farmer. So that's just here something worth mentioning, I think. If we look again at the usable ppf for this light, so the average we got was 548. So if we multiply that 548 with our 1.49, which is our grow area in square meters, we get a usable ppf of 816 micromoles. So let's just go ahead and input this information in our calculator here. So the light itself will draw about 480 watts and it costs around $590 US. So we said that we had 816 micromoles as our usable ppf. So that gives us a 1.7 micromoles per watt efficiency, which is still considered a high efficiency. And then we get a cost efficiency of around 72 cents per micromole, which is a good price according again to this calculator. And then if we look at the harvest potential, we're around 612 grams on the higher end, which is around 22 ounces. So yeah, but one thing that is here interesting as well is those temperature measurements that we had. So in the case of our Viparspectra, it actually ran a bit cooler than the other two. So we're talking about 52 degrees Celsius on our panel and 55 degrees Celsius on our driver. So it's a bit cooler than the other lights. And when you look at the design of the heatsink, for example, I mean, it makes sense. Now, which light would win this sort of experiment? I would say none of them would be really a winner. I would have to actually calculate a lot more things. For example, the spectrum of our lights. But I mean, they're definitely pretty similar. Like if you look at those three lights, you quickly notice that there's not a huge difference, you know, between each of them. Mars Hydro is probably, you know, like I said, the coverage is a bit less than the other two. The temperature, on the other hand, for the Viparspectra, the operating temperature seems to be better. And for the Spider Farmer, I mean, there's also some great pros. I mean, they have a fantastic customer service, and they've just been really popular so far, and a lot of people are using them, and they're doing a great job. So when we look at these metrics, I mean, these are three very similar grow lights, and it's kind of what I guessed, because I mean, we're talking about three budget LED grow lights here, so there's not going to be a huge difference between those. In the near future, we're going to test other lights, and I just can't wait to actually test some array lights, you know, bar LED grow lights, because I know these have a very interesting efficiency and a very interesting total output as well. Light coverage is better, and so probably in the future, when we do a sort of review of those lights, we'll be able to take this data using the same protocol we just used, and we'll be able to compare, for example, a Spider Farmer SF4000 with a Photon Tech, for example, so you guys can then, you know, make a decision. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you think I missed anything, as always, mention it in the comments. If you guys have any suggestions, a light that you want to be tested, or you know, anything, just reach out to us, and it'll be a pleasure to have a chat with you. With that being said, hope you guys have a great day. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and stay tuned. Peace.